October of 1996, city Novokuznetsk, Russia. Plumber and police officer needed to break in the apartment of one of the locals, who refused to let them in for a checkup for a couple of weeks. When they finally entered, they see blood all over apartment, dismembered piece of torso in the bathroom, and a crying, heavily beaten up girl. How could this happen, and where is the person who did all of this? In this video, I will tell you the story of one of the most horrific serial killers in Russian history, Alexander Spesivtsev.
Ну как тебе не стыдно? Ты за что так на меня обозлен? Бессовестный ты!
Я не обозлен.
Нет, ты почему так ко мне агрессивно
Да, я
настроен?
потому что с меня требуют трупы.
А я его не брала, твой труп!
А
я
я
его
его-
не ем! А ты сказал, что я котлеты делаю! Бессовестный ты!
Hi, you're watching the Dronis channel. Alexander Spesivtsev's case I want to tell you about is one of the most horrific crime cases of Russia, and this is one of the few cases where not only serial killer was caught and punished, but also his mother for playing a big role in his crime. And if you will enjoy this video, please leave a like and consider subscribing to channel. And I hope you will enjoy it. Let's begin. In early June of 1986, in city Novokuznetsk, near the river Aba, horrific discoveries were made. Police extracted skulls that seemingly belonged to children. A couple of days after it, more fragments of bodies were found. City Novokuznetsk never before faced such horrific crime. The expertise have shown that at least 6 girls and 3 boys were murdered, all of them aged from 9 to 14 years old. Soon the investigation group was created, and it included best detectives in the region. The first conclusion they made was that most likely bodies were dismembered indoors, because they were cut in too many pieces, so if somebody would want to do it outside, it should have taken too much time, so probably somebody would have seen something. Also, it was most likely that everything was done using a knife and a saw. During that time, the economy was in a very bad spot. The only factory in Novokuznetsk was closed, and the amount of homeless and neglected children was on the rise. They probably were easy victims for the murder. Hundreds of law enforcement officers and even the soldiers were involved in the search of the monster whose crime astounded the whole city. They searched everywhere they could reach. All of the dysfunctional families, people with mental illnesses, and ex-convicts who were jailed for similar crimes were visited and questioned by police. Still, no clues. While this was happening, kids started disappearing from the streets. 2 weeks after the bodies were discovered in the river, 14-year-old Lena Sakharova and 15-year-old Olya Nikitina went missing. After a thorough search, girls still were nowhere to be found. Vladimir Semyonov, one of the lead detectives working on this case, after analyzing the location of the bodies that were found and the approximate area where 2 girls went missing, came to conclusion that the murderer must be using a car. Traffic police was ordered to stop every car that had children inside. 10 people were arrested, but it turned out that they were taxi drivers who were illegally transporting children and teenagers without adults. All of them were fined and let go. Local drug dens were raided too. Detectives were showing Lena's and Olya's photographs to all of the detainees, hoping that maybe they knew something, but nobody saw them. 43 children have gone missing since summer vacation started in schools of Novokuznetsk. Some of them could have just ran away from their parents, but the number was much higher than usual. Many versions were considered by investigators, like organ trafficking or abduction to get ransom, but none of them were confirmed. Detectives even checked all of the local hunters associations and questioned the members. Maybe some of them were showing signs of excess violence, but again, it gave nothing. Then Detective Semyonov noticed a pattern. Most of the missing girls were named Yelena and Olga, and all of them were aged from 11 to 15 years old. Could it have been possible that the murderer was having a small talk with kids he met on the streets, and then lured them into his car? Semyonov checked police databases to see if there are any records about criminals committing crimes against kids with names Yelena and Olga. It turned out that there were only two people who were convicted and matched this description, but they both lived in the different regions of Russia, and it was unlikely that the murders were committed by them. Then he checked all of the people in Novokuznetsk who were previously jailed for sexual crimes against children, and one of them caught extra attention. It was a butcher on one of the local markets, Gurkin Grigory, who was 40 years old at the time. He was known as unsociable, irritable, and cheap. Grigory had a car and also was once stopped and questioned after investigation started, because he was giving a ride for two teenage girls. Police decided to establish surveillance after him, and once, instead of his usual route, Grigory didn't go to the market, but went in other direction. But by accident, detectives have lost him, and in the evening he didn't return home. Detectives expected the worst, and in the morning, Grigory's neighbors called the police, telling that there is a blood pouring from under his door, and they also felt a horrible smell of decay from behind it. When police officers arrived and broke the door, nobody was inside, but they found few bags with pork on the floor with blood dripping out of them. And then it turned out that Grigory just had gotten into a car accident and was in a hospital for 2 days at that moment. Detectives were very disappointed. This time they were hoping that they caught the real killer, but most likely this man wasn't the murderer. Then, near one of the local waste grounds, there were remains found that belonged to two local young women. Both of them were named Yelena and both of them were homeless. This time victims were older, so it could have meant that the murderer switched from killing kids to adults. Victims were homeless and both of them didn't work anywhere. This time the outrage was too strong. People were really mad because so many murders happened and the killer was still not caught. The Minister of Internal Affairs of Russia demanded that the killer should be caught in the shortest time possible. And the best detectives of the lead investigation department of Russia now joined the investigation. Also now, any information about similar crimes was gathered and analyzed. Because of this, many kids that escaped their home was found and returned. But the location of 8 boys and 5 girls in Novokuznetsk was still unknown. All of them studied in one school and some of them even disappeared in one day, which was very suspicious. One of the local children saw them near the construction site of one of the apartment buildings. Detectives searched everywhere around that building and questioned all of the construction workers there. They even considered that maybe kids just fell somewhere in that building and possibly were immured in concrete. But the lead engineer said that this was not possible. Later, even the sewers under the city were searched thoroughly, but nothing there too. Soon, in city Taliati, someone named Oleg Rylkov was arrested for killing and assaulting 2 girls and 1 woman. He also previously lived in Novokuznetsk. And obviously, when detectives who worked on Novokuznetsk murders found out about that, they became pretty sure that this is the man they were searching for. But while Oleg was still under arrest, 3 more girls went missing in Novokuznetsk. And soon, the head of one of them was found in the remote and deserted part of the city. Now it became clear that Rylkov wasn't the Novokuznetsk murderer. Now the only hope to catch the real serial killer was to find any clues while investigating disappearance of 3 girls. It was established that 13-year-old Nastya and Zhenya and 15-year-old Oля were under treatment in one of the local hospitals. They decided to escape and go for a walk, not telling anyone of the staff members. So now detectives tried to establish what were the possible places where girls could have went. Among other places, they checked local grocery stores. Food in the hospital wasn't great, to say the least, so they maybe left to buy something. And the worker of one of the stores on Pionierskaya Street recognized girls from the photograph. She remembered that girls were approached by an older woman and she asked them something. Then all of them together have left the store. It was a shorter, overweight woman, around 60 years old. Detective Semyonov thought that this woman just lured the girls somewhere. It was unlikely that she killed all three of them by herself. Investigators decided to check the neighborhood near that grocery store again. Identikit of the woman that was talking to girls was sent to all of the local policemen, and soon one of them reached back, telling that the woman on identikit looked similar to Lyudmila Spesivtseva. This woman lived in the apartment on that same street some time ago, and was remembered because she was having constant conflicts with all of her neighbors. She loved to listen loud music and was occasionally fluting her neighbors' apartments. Ludmila worked nearby as a watchman in local kindergarten. She also had a son, Alexander Spesivtsev, who was born in 1970, but at the time he was under treatment in psychiatric hospital in other city, Orel. Immediately, detectives were sent to find Ludmila in the kindergarten where she worked. But when they arrived, they were told that she quit from her job 2 days ago. Then they went to check her old apartment on Pionierska Street, that same street where the store was located. But she wasn't there either. But the local police officer was told to keep an eye on this apartment, hoping that she might be returning there. On the next day, local municipal plumbers reported that when they were doing a routine checkup, a man from that same apartment answered from behind the door, telling that he cannot open the door because he is locked inside, as he is mentally ill. Semyonov understood everything and made a call. He called to Orel to see if Alexander Spesivtsev, Ludmila's son, was actually under treatment in one of the mental institutions in that city. And, as he expected, Semyonov was told that Alexander was already released from one of the mental hospitals 2 years ago. The special group was immediately sent to the apartment of Alexander Spesivtsev. In the meantime, local plumber and police officer came to check that same apartment, number 357. This time they came to break in, because the plumbing system in that building was seriously damaged. Both of them didn't know that a dangerous serial killer might be inside. When they entered, both of them felt horrific smell of rotting flesh. Soon they saw a girl that was almost dying. When the shocked officer entered the bathroom, he saw something even more horrific. Dismembered, decaying torso lying in the bathtub. Girl was sent to the hospital. She had a broken arm and the wound on her abdomen. She was also seriously beaten. It was 15-year-old Oля who disappeared with her two friends a month ago. Right from the hospital bed, she gave her first testimony. On the next day, Lyudmila Spesivtseva was arrested. She was the woman who lured girls in the Spesivtsev's apartment. But police was still searching for Alexander. He was able to run away through the window while his apartment door was being opened. 3 days after it, he was arrested near his apartment building. He was hungry and searching for food and freezing. It was hard for him to survive without his mother. On the interrogations, he told that in 1991 he met a woman, Zhenya Guselnikova. They dated and everything was great. Alexander was even reading poems for her. But after he acted violent during a couple of arguments, Zhenya decided to leave Alexander. Spesivtsev became furious and locked Zhenya in his apartment and started beating her up. After a month, she died, but investigation concluded that Zhenya died of starvation and sepsis. Maybe because of her septic wounds, experts weren't able to prove that the beating by Spesivtsev caused her death. Alexander was diagnosed with schizophrenia and sent to mandatory treatment. 3 years later, he was recognized as mentally stable and released. But Spesivtsev became even more angry and full of hate after the release. Also, while in psychiatric facility, he asked one of the other patients to sew in a little steel pellet in his genitalia for his own pleasure. But what he did created a wound that never healed and caused constant pain that was making Spesivtsev even more angry. After the release, Spesivtsev was also often seen wandering through the train station, talking to homeless people, and sometimes buying them cheap drinks. There he met Elena Turnova, who he invited home. At At some point they argued and Spesivtsev stabbed Yelena with a knife. 1 month later, another 22-year-old woman was killed by Spesivtsev. Neighbors didn't even pay attention to screams that they heard through the loud music. They knew that Alexander was mentally ill, and they just thought that this was normal. And at some point, Spesivtsev, because he was unpunished for so long, switched to killing children. His first victims he found near the construction site. He just approached kids and offered them cigarettes. Then he offered them to steal from one apartment he knew, and when kids agreed, he just took them to his own home. When they all entered the apartment, kids started suspecting something, but it was too late. Spesivtsev took a knife and killed all of them. For a week, he was just keeping bodies in the corridor, and at some point his mother came home. Alexander ordered her to take away the bodies and just left to sleep. Ludmila didn't say anything, just took the remains in steel buckets and threw them in the river. Murders continued, and Alexander's mother was just getting rid of more and more bodies, but she was still very careful, always doing it after dark and using steel buckets. Nobody suspected anything. Somebody could ask, why did it take so long to catch Spesivtsev? It turned out that because of simple mistake, officially he was still in psychiatric hospital under treatment. So if anybody would ever suspect him, they could have just checked the documents and assumed that he's under treatment now, and there would have been no reason to suspect him. Because of this mistake, at least 20 people were killed. Spesivtsev's last crimes were beyond horrific. At this point, he almost didn't leave home at all. 24th of September, his mother, Ludmila, lured 3 girls for her son to butcher. It was Zhenya, Nastya, and Olga. Ludmila approached girls in the grocery store and asked them for help. She said she needed help opening her apartment door because she had too many bags with her. Girls were planning to visit a party, but they were too kind to refuse to help this lady. Even when they were at Spesivtsev's door, when he opened it, they didn't really suspect anything. The short and skinny man didn't scare them. And then the true horror began. First victim, Nastya, was killed by stabbing in her heart, neck, and abdomen. When Spesivtsev saw that she is still alive, he strangled Nastya with a rope. And then he ordered his mother and the girls to dismember Nastya's body. Girls refused, and Alexander started stabbing them, but in a way so they won't die instantly. Then Spesivtsev cuffed them to the heating battery using handcuffs. At night, his mother, as usually, went to throw the remains out. Then Alexander found out that some of the remains were still left in his apartment. So his mother boiled them and told Alexander to take them to Zhenya and Olga to eat. Spesivtsev's dog was also eating some of the remains. For a few days, Spesivtsev just photographed the girls and assaulted them. But soon he heard girls discussing escape, so Alexander started beating Zhenya up furiously, and she soon died because of it. Oля was the girl who was found by the plumber and police officer in the Spesivtsev's apartment. After talking to detectives in hospital and giving her testimony, she died 3 days later. Nobody really knows how many people died in Spesivtsev's apartment. Investigators assumed that there were around 20 victims, but there are some signs that this number is much higher. There were around 40 different types of jewelry in his apartment, and 82 pieces of clothes covered with blood, and also photographs of small children, and even 2 pairs of tiny children's shoes. But how it all came to this, that both mother and her son were committing such heinous crimes. Ludmila Spesivtseva, when she just moved in the apartment 357, was always unfriendly with everyone, and the only thing she cared about was her little son, Alexander. He was sleeping with his mother till the age of 12 and was constantly ill. He was just born unhealthy with multiple diseases. In school, Alexander never had any friends and was dreaming of revenge to everyone. His mother also hated other kids who were healthy and beautiful. After Ludmila was fired for stealing from the school where she worked as a janitor, she started working in court as an assistant attorney. She had an access to photographs from the crime scenes. so Ludmila was taking them home and showing them to her little son. Alexander was fascinated by those photographs, and he was also reading criminal case files like books, spending hours doing so. And this spoiled little boy that was surrounded by his mother's love slowly became a monster. When Spesivtsev started killing, his mother just accepted what he was doing and just covered his crimes. And at some point, she even started enjoying what was happening so much that she began bringing victims home so her beloved son could have fun. Then they started consuming their victims' remains as food and feeding them to their dog. During the interrogation, Spesivtsev's mother, Ludmila, was pretending that she is just old innocent woman and she wanted to make detectives think that she was just afraid of her son, that's why she did everything. But her role in those crimes was very serious because not only she was getting rid of those bodies, but she also helped her son to get new victims. And I think she could have went to police at any moment and she almost as guilty as her son. Alexander also had a sister that was occasionally coming home, but on the interrogations she told that she had nothing to do with the murders and she didn't even know about them. She wasn't punished at all. Alexander's mother, Ludmila, was sentenced to 15 years in prison. After serving her sentence, she was released in 2008 and now she's a free woman. Alexander, again, was recognized as insane as was sentenced to mandatory treatment. This treatment will last indefinitely, but by Russian law, if at some point he will be recognized as sane and safe for society, he might be released. But because of what he did, it most likely will never happen. He is still under treatment to this day and there's not much information about him. Thank you for watching. Tell me what you think in comments and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye.